June 18, 1944. The room is dim, lit by a single overhead lamp bouncing off a sprawling map of Europe. Outside, the chill of an English summer wind rattles the window panes of the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF in Bushy Park, southwest of London. Rain streaks the glass, a reminder of the ever unpredictable weather that has already delayed operations along the Normandy coast. Inside, Dwight D. Eisenhower sits at the head of the long table, eyes calm but sharp, scanning troop movements and logistical reports. Across from him, Bernard Montgomery leans forward, his voice firm, almost insistent, over the low murmur of aides and officers arranging documents. Every so often, the map shifts under the weight of a strategic pointer, each movement reflecting the immense pressure bearing down on the Allies. Outside this room, the war rages on German forces entrenched in Normandy, Allied divisions struggling to consolidate gains from the D-Day landings. Lives, equipment, and months of planning hang in a delicate balance. Yet inside, the tension is human, almost palpable. Two leaders, both brilliant, both unyielding, now face a moment where ambition, duty, and strategy collide. One demand, one misstep, could ripple through the war effort, shaping not just the campaign but the very course of history. The air is thick with anticipation. Eisenhower, normally composed, is poised. Montgomery, resolute, is ready to push. Outside, thunder rumbles. Inside, a different storm brews, one of will and command. This confrontation is about to begin. June 1944 marked a pivotal juncture in World War II. The Allies had finally secured a foothold on the European continent after the D-Day landings on June 6, opening a long-awaited Western Front against Nazi Germany. Normandy's beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword had been seized at great cost, but the campaign had barely begun. The German army, though battered and outnumbered, remained a disciplined, adaptive force, entrenched in fortified positions and backed by the jagged terrain of hedgerows and villages that slowed Allied advances. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, faced an unprecedented challenge, coordinating forces from multiple nations, each with its own chain of command, expectations, and ambitions. The Americans, British, and Canadians had to operate as a single, cohesive army, yet tensions simmered beneath the surface. Montgomery, commanding the British 21st Army Group, had achieved early success in consolidating his sector and was eager to push the advantage aggressively. His insistence on bold, rapid movements reflected both his confidence and a personal desire for decisive action, a pattern that had frustrated Eisenhower in prior operations. The operational landscape was brutal. Allied supply lines stretched thin across the bocage, a dense maze of hedgerows that favored the defender. German panzer divisions, though weakened, struck with precision, counter-attacking whenever gaps appeared. Weather compounded the difficulty. Sudden rainstorms turned fields into mud, bogging tanks and artillery, delaying the movement of infantry and essential supplies. Intelligence reports indicated German forces were regrouping north and west of Caen, preparing for defensive counteroffensives that could stall or even reverse Allied gains. Behind the scenes, Eisenhower's role required more than tactical insight. He had to balance ambition with caution, tempering Montgomery's aggressiveness against the broader Allied strategy, which prioritized coordination with American forces advancing from the west and south. Every decision carried weight. A failed push in Normandy could jeopardize the entire Western Front, waste precious resources, and cost thousands of lives. Montgomery's demands, though grounded in tactical rationale, increasingly pressed the limits of what Eisenhower could authorize without risking operational integrity. Eisenhower's staff worked tirelessly to reconcile these competing pressures. Maps sprawled across tables, dotted with unit positions, supply depots, and enemy sightings. Radio reports crackled continuously, updating command on the front line's shifting conditions. Logistics officers calculated fuel, ammunition, and rations, planners modeled attack timings against German defensive patterns. Each hour that passed tightened the stakes. Montgomery, ever the strategist, pushed for faster breakthroughs and more aggressive offensives, while Eisenhower weighed the human cost and the long-term campaign strategy. By mid-June, the situation was clear. Normandy was a battlefield of opportunity and danger, of calculated risk and human endurance. Eisenhower understood the war was not won solely by daring maneuvers, but by patience, coordination, and the unity of Allied command. Montgomery, however, saw opportunity as a call to immediate action. This divergence in perspective, amplified by personalities and national pride, would soon erupt into a confrontation that would test leadership, judgment, and the delicate equilibrium of the Allied command. The stage was set. The Allies held the beaches, but the question remained, how far could Eisenhower bend without breaking the unified effort? And how far would Montgomery push before the Supreme Commander finally said, "No"? By late June 1944, Normandy had become a crucible of strategy, ambition, and endurance. The Allies had established their lodgment, but the terrain and the enemy had transformed every advance into a calculated gamble. Roads were cratered by shellfire, villages reduced to rubble, and hedgerows transformed into defensive labyrinths for German troops. Tanks struggled through the mud, infantry slogged through fields under constant artillery threat. The human cost was mounting, and Eisenhower had to weigh every decision against not just tactical success, but the moral responsibility of thousands of lives under his command. Montgomery, in contrast, saw the situation differently. His 21st Army Group had managed steady progress in the eastern sector, and he believed a rapid, concentrated push could break German resistance entirely. Every report of a stalled attack, a missed opportunity, or hesitant maneuver frustrated him. He viewed caution as unnecessary restraint, an obstacle to achieving the decisive blow that could end the campaign before winter. Yet his demands increasingly strained Allied logistics. Fuel convoys were already stretched, artillery units required precise timing, and air support had to be coordinated with American forces in adjacent sectors. Pushing too hard, too fast, risked fracturing this delicate balance. Political pressures compounded the operational challenges. The Allied leadership, including British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt, expected swift, visible progress to maintain public morale. Each setback, no matter how minor, carried weight in the press and the halls of government. Montgomery, aware of the scrutiny, often pressed for bold operations that would cement his reputation, while Eisenhower had to temper ambition with diplomacy, ensuring national egos and political agendas did not compromise the overall campaign. Communication lines buzzed constantly. Eisenhower's aides relayed updates from multiple fronts, each demanding a decision within minutes. Montgomery's messages, increasingly insistent, outlined ambitious proposals: faster armored thrusts, extended supply lines, and aggressive flanking maneuvers. Eisenhower studied each request with the weight of precedent and consequence, knowing that one misstep could undo months of planning, alienate Allied commanders, and endanger tens of thousands of soldiers. He recognized Montgomery's brilliance, yet also the peril in unchecked audacity. Amid this pressure, personality played as crucial a role as strategy. Eisenhower's calm, measured demeanor had earned him respect and loyalty, but Montgomery's resolute, sometimes uncompromising style tested every limit. Their interactions were not just operational, they were psychological. Each meeting, each report, each demand revealed the subtle tension between prudence and ambition, restraint and initiative. The Allies could not afford internal fractures, yet the collision of wills was inevitable. By early July, the stage was fully set. Montgomery had made his next demand, one that would strain Eisenhower's patience beyond the limits he had tolerated before. The timing, the intensity, and the stakes were perfect for a confrontation that would define command dynamics in the Allied forces. Normandy had become not just a battlefield of men and machines, but of leadership, judgment, and the delicate art of holding a coalition together under the relentless pressure of war. Eisenhower, poised at his map table, now faced a decision that would test his authority, judgment, and ability to balance strategy with human temperament. The moment was approaching when patience would give way to firm resolve, and a single command would echo far beyond the walls of CHAEF. The tension was tangible, history was waiting. The confrontation between Eisenhower and Montgomery was not only strategic but profoundly human. Two men, forged in different military traditions, each carried the weight of their experience, pride, and personal ambitions. Eisenhower, the American general, had a quiet authority. His temperament was measured, patient, and reflective. Every decision was filtered through an awareness of the human cost. He carried in his mind the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers, the civilians caught in the crossfire, and the delicate morale of the Allied nations. Montgomery, in contrast, was bold, confident, and at times uncompromising. He saw opportunity in every moment and measured success by immediate tactical gains and the glory of decisive victory. This human tension shaped every meeting. Montgomery's insistence on aggressive action tested Eisenhower's patience, probing limits that were as psychological as they were operational. Their exchanges, though calm on the surface, were charged with unspoken emotion, pride, frustration, and the burden of responsibility. The clash was as much about ego and principle as about strategy, revealing that leadership in war is never purely rational. The human element, temperament, resilience, and the subtle interplay of personalities could determine outcomes as decisively as tanks or artillery. 2. Leadership angle. Eisenhower's leadership style emphasized coalition management, strategic patience, and moral responsibility. As Supreme Allied Commander, he was the linchpin holding together a multinational force with diverse doctrines, expectations, and egos. Montgomery, by contrast, led from a position of confidence in his tactical judgment. He expected decisive action, rapid advances, and operational boldness. The friction arose from their contrasting approaches, Eisenhower's holistic vision versus Montgomery's sector-focused aggressiveness. Leadership, in this instance, was about more than issuing orders. It was about judgment, diplomacy, and timing. Eisenhower had to exercise authority without undermining morale or fracturing the coalition. Montgomery's approach, while tactically sound in isolated contexts, risked operational overreach and logistical strain. The confrontation was a test of command authority, Eisenhower's ability to assert limits decisively, and Montgomery's willingness to accept restraint for the greater strategic good. 3. Tactical angle. Normandy's terrain made tactical decisions excruciatingly complex. Hedgerows, small villages, and narrow roads favored the defenders and slowed advances. Montgomery's proposal to push aggressively aimed to exploit perceived weaknesses in German lines, but such moves carried substantial risk. Advancing too far without secured supply lines could isolate units, leaving them vulnerable to counterattacks. Eisenhower had to weigh the tactical promise of speed against the operational reality of sustainability. Each attack required precise coordination of infantry, armor, artillery, and air support. One misstep could leave forces overextended, exposing flanks to counterattacks or forcing costly retreats. The tactical disagreement was therefore not academic. It directly influenced the feasibility of the operations, the safety of troops, and the success of the Normandy campaign itself. 4. Technological logistical angle. Beyond personalities and strategy, the confrontation had a material dimension. Allied advances depended on logistics, fuel, ammunition, and artillery supply, and on technology, including armored units and air support. Montgomery's demands for accelerated offensives risked outrunning these resources. Tanks could be stalled in mud, Artillery could be left without ammunition, aircraft could be unavailable due to weather or other priorities. Eisenhower's decision-making had to account for these constraints. Leadership without logistics is theory, strategy without technology is impractical. The confrontation, therefore, was as much about resources as it was about wills. Eisenhower's refusal to yield to Montgomery's demand reflected an acute awareness that operational success was inseparable from material readiness. 5. Enemy angle. Any confrontation with an Allied command had to be measured against the enemy's capabilities and intentions. German forces in Normandy were not passive, they were disciplined, adaptive, and ruthless. Panzer divisions, artillery units, and fortified positions could exploit any Allied misstep. Montgomery's push for a rapid advance risked overextending supply lines, leaving troops exposed to counterattacks or ambushes. Eisenhower, aware of this, understood that tactical audacity could play into German hands. Every demand Montgomery made had to be evaluated not just for immediate gain, but for how it would affect the enemy's ability to regroup, reinforce, or strike. The confrontation, therefore, was inseparable from the strategic chessboard. A miscalculation could cost thousands of lives and undo hard-won gains. 6. Morals. A ethical angle. Command in war is as much an ethical endeavor as it is strategic. Eisenhower's restraint reflected an acute awareness of the human cost. Rapid, aggressive advances promised glory, but at the price of potential casualties. Montgomery's insistence on bold maneuvers highlighted a recurring tension in military leadership, the balance between ambition and responsibility. Eisenhower's decision to push back against the demand was rooted in more than authority. It was a moral imperative, ensuring that strategy did not become recklessness, and that soldiers' lives were preserved wherever possible. The confrontation, therefore, was a moral test as much as a strategic one, a question of duty, judgment, and the value placed on human life amid the chaos of war. 7. Political. Strategic angle. The broader strategic context added further pressure. Allied leaders, from Roosevelt to Churchill, monitored every development. Montgomery's proposals, if executed, could produce rapid, visible victories, but also carry high risk, potentially causing delays or failures that would attract scrutiny and political backlash. Eisenhower had to consider how every operational choice would be perceived internationally, how it would affect coalition unity, and how it would impact public morale. His refusal to grant Montgomery's demand was not simply a matter of personal authority, it was a strategic judgment aimed at preserving the broader war effort, maintaining coalition cohesion, and ensuring that political pressures did not compromise military efficacy. Together, these angles illustrate a confrontation that transcended a simple disagreement. It was a collision of personalities, a clash of tactical philosophies, a test of ethical judgment, and a navigation of political realities. Each perspective, the human, tactical, technological, enemy, moral, and political, intertwined to create a moment of immense pressure, one that would culminate in a defining decision. Eisenhower's eventual "enough" would be the product of careful consideration across all these dimensions, revealing the complexity of command at the highest level of war. The stage was now set for the decisive moment, the clash between audacity and caution, ambition and authority, Montgomery's insistence and Eisenhower's measured judgment. July 12, 1944. The CHAF planning room is quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the faint hum of a ceiling fan. Outside, summer rain continues to streak the windows, a muted rhythm against the tension inside. Eisenhower sits at the head of the table, calm, composed, eyes fixed on a detailed map of the Normandy front. Each line, each arrow, each unit marker represents weeks of planning, thousands of men, and countless logistical calculations. Montgomery, standing over the map with his usual intensity, lays out his proposal again. He wants an accelerated, armored advance across the Ken-Falaise corridor, a maneuver he believes could break German resistance before reinforcements arrive. His voice is firm, insistent, almost pleading, but it carries the weight of command, tactical logic, and national pride. He points to gaps in German lines, to the potential for a rapid encirclement, highlighting opportunities that only someone of his experience could see. Eisenhower listens quietly, absorbing every detail, weighing not just the plan itself, but the human and operational consequences. Supplies are not ready for the pace Montgomery demands. Fuel convoys risk delay. Artillery support cannot be reliably coordinated across multiple sectors. The air forces needed for cover are committed elsewhere. Each risk is calculated, every potential loss magnified by the reality of combat. The room is thick with unspoken tension. Staff officers exchange glances, sensing the brewing confrontation. Montgomery presses further, emphasizing speed, initiative, and the advantage of striking while the Germans are reorganizing. He appeals subtly to Eisenhower's desire for decisiveness, painting the move as essential for Allied momentum. Yet Eisenhower remains still, his hand resting on the edge of the map. His expression betrays nothing, but inside, a storm of judgment is forming. He has tolerated insistent demands before, allowed ambitious maneuvers, balanced competing personalities, but this time the risk is too high. Time seems to slow. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery punctuates the moment, a reminder that the war continues beyond the walls of this room. Inside, the clash is quieter, but no less intense. Montgomery, confident, nearly bristling, waits for the Supreme Commander's decision. Eisenhower finally leans forward, the weight of authority settling into his posture. His voice, calm yet unmistakably firm, cuts through the tension. This is enough. The words hang in the air, final and unyielding. Montgomery pauses, eyes narrowing slightly, then leans back, absorbing the refusal. The room holds its collective breath. No further argument can override the Supreme Commander's judgment. In that instant, Eisenhower asserts not just authority, but responsibility. Responsibility for strategy, for coalition cohesion, and for the lives of the men on the front lines. Outside Normandy, battles rage. Tanks advance cautiously, and soldiers fight relentlessly. Inside SHAF, a different battle has been won, one of leadership, judgment, and control. The confrontation marks a turning point, not in the physical war, but in command dynamics. Montgomery, though temporarily restrained, remains a formidable force. Eisenhower's decision establishes the boundaries of authority, ensuring that audacity does not override prudence in the Allied campaign. The stage is set for the operational consequences of this decision. A moment where human judgment intersects with the machinery of war, shaping the course of the campaign and the balance of command. The room remains heavy with silence after Eisenhower's words. Montgomery, usually impervious to opposition, exhales slowly, his jaw tight. For a brief moment, the commanding bravado that had defined his career falters, replaced by the grudging recognition that the Supreme Commander's authority is absolute. Staff officers, who had sensed the tension for weeks, exhale as well, aware that a delicate balance within SHAF has been momentarily restored. Outside the walls of the planning room, the war does not pause. Allied units advance cautiously through Normandy's shattered villages, hedgerows, and shell-cratered roads. German troops regroup along the Orne River, digging in for counterattacks. Montgomery's proposed thrust would have risked overextension, leaving armor and infantry vulnerable in narrow corridors with limited supply lines. Eisenhower's restraint preserves the cohesion of the Allied forces, ensuring that progress continues at a sustainable pace. His decision is not popular with all observers, but it is pragmatic, tempered by logistics, terrain, and the realities of enemy resistance. Montgomery, though visibly frustrated, adapts. He recalibrates his strategy within Eisenhower's limits, focusing on consolidating gains, securing supply lines, and coordinating more closely with American forces advancing in the western sectors. This temporary setback for his ambitions underscores a crucial lesson in coalition warfare. Individual brilliance must sometimes yield to collective strategy. Eisenhower, for his part, maintains a calm presence, ensuring that the confrontation does not escalate into open conflict. Letters, memos, and subsequent meetings reflect a professional, if tense, working relationship, an uneasy balance of respect, authority, and occasional irritation. The decision reverberates beyond the planning room. Allied commanders across Normandy recognize the authority of the Supreme Commander and adjust their operations accordingly. Units on the ground benefit indirectly from Eisenhower's prudence. Supply convoys are able to reach forward positions without undue strain. Artillery support is coordinated efficiently, and air cover is deployed where it is most needed. The campaign continues, methodical yet relentless, illustrating how leadership decisions in moments of high tension can shape the operational tempo and the fate of thousands of soldiers. For Montgomery, the confrontation is a lesson in restraint. For Eisenhower, it is a reaffirmation of the responsibilities inherent in supreme command. The moment crystallizes the delicate interplay between ambition and caution, audacity and authority. While the battle for Normandy rages, an internal battle has been resolved. One that defines the command structure, sets boundaries for initiative, and underscores the human dimension of leadership amidst the machinery of war. As Normandy's landscape continues to absorb the chaos of combat, the echoes of this confrontation resonate within WWII. Eisenhower's decision has prevented reckless overreach, preserved operational integrity, and ensured that the Allied advance remains coordinated, sustainable, and strategically sound. The calm authority he asserts here will shape the campaign's next critical phase, allowing the Allies to maintain momentum while minimizing unnecessary risk. The moment has passed, but its consequences are enduring. Command, once tested to its limits, emerges stronger, and the stage is set for the aftermath, the tangible results of strategy, discipline, and human judgment in the heart of one of history's most complex campaigns. In the weeks following Eisenhower's decisive refusal, the Allied campaign in Normandy continued, but the effects of the confrontation were immediately apparent. Montgomery, while momentarily constrained, redirected his energies into consolidating gains rather than pursuing high-risk maneuvers. His forces advanced methodically, securing towns, strengthening supply lines, and coordinating closely with American units to the west. The pace was deliberate, frustrating to some who sought rapid results, but effective in maintaining cohesion across the multinational front. Eisenhower's decision reinforced a central principle of coalition warfare: authority at the top must balance initiative with restraint. Allied commanders on both sides observed that audacity, while admirable, must never compromise the broader strategy. The morale of field officers and soldiers, who were already fatigued from continuous engagements in hedgerows and bombed-out villages, benefited from the predictable structure that Eisenhower imposed. Units were not sent into overextended attacks without adequate support, and supply lines remained intact despite constant pressure from front-line operations. German forces, meanwhile, remained formidable but cautious. They interpreted the Allied advance as steady rather than reckless, adjusting their counterattacks accordingly. The Allies avoided the costly overextensions that might have invited encirclement or ambush, reducing casualties and preserving combat effectiveness. Intelligence reports from the front noted fewer units trapped or cut off than initially feared, a direct consequence of Eisenhower's tempered command. At WWII, the dynamic between Eisenhower and Montgomery stabilized, though tension lingered. Staff communications reveal a professional, if wary, cooperation. Montgomery's ambition was acknowledged, his insights utilized, but within the framework Eisenhower established. Command meetings, once charged with the risk of verbal clashes, proceeded with a clearer understanding of boundaries. The decision effectively codified Eisenhower's authority in operational matters, ensuring that future disputes could be managed without jeopardizing strategic priorities or Allied unity. Beyond the immediate operational impact, the confrontation influenced Allied planning at the highest level. Roosevelt and Churchill, though geographically distant, received reports highlighting the necessity of discipline in coalition command. The balance between audacity and caution, ambition and restraint, became a guiding principle not only in Normandy, but in subsequent operations across Western Europe. Eisenhower's assertiveness ensured that strategic cohesion remained intact, that endured despite occasional friction. A testament to Eisenhower's ability to assert authority without fracturing relationships. Strategically, the Normandy campaign maintained its momentum. By mid-August, Allied forces successfully executed the encirclement of German units in the Falaise Pocket, a decisive maneuver that would cripple German resistance in western France. Eisenhower's insistence on coordination over impulsive action allowed Allied forces to exploit opportunities systematically rather than risk piecemeal failures. The operational integrity of the campaign, strengthened by this confrontation, accelerated the liberation of Paris and facilitated the subsequent push toward Germany. The long-term consequences extended beyond operations and strategy. Eisenhower's confrontation with Montgomery became a defining example of leadership under pressure, illustrating the importance of decisiveness, judgment, and moral responsibility. It demonstrated that command is not merely a matter of issuing orders, but of understanding human behavior, operational realities, and strategic imperatives. Montgomery's willingness to adapt within these limits exemplified the balance between individual initiative and coalition cohesion, a lesson that would resonate through the remainder of the European campaign. Ultimately, Eisenhower's refusal to yield reinforced the principle that leadership in war requires both authority and accountability. The immediate gains in Normandy were matched by the long-term preservation of Allied unity, operational coherence, and strategic advantage. In the chaos of battle, the measured exercise of command, embodied in this confrontation, proved as vital to victory as tanks, artillery, and soldiers' courage on the front lines. The moment had passed, but its echoes would shape Allied decision-making throughout the European theater, laying the foundation for a campaign defined by coordination, discipline, and the judicious exercise of power. History often remembers battles, sieges, and campaigns, but the quieter moments of leadership can be just as decisive. The confrontation between Eisenhower and Montgomery was one such moment. It was a collision not of armies, but of judgment, temperament, and responsibility. In a dimly lit planning room in Bush, setting the stage for the eventual encirclement of German forces in the Falaise Pocket and the advance toward Paris. The confrontation's consequences were tangible on multiple fronts, operationally, tactically, and psychologically. Eisenhower's authority stabilized decision-making. Montgomery adapted to constraints while retaining tactical initiative, and the Allied forces moved forward with a measured yet relentless momentum. The human cost was mitigated, supply chains remained functional, and strategic objectives remained achievable. History would remember this as more than a disagreement between generals. It was a moment where leadership, judgment, and responsibility intersected, shaping the course of one of the most critical campaigns of World War II. As July 1944 progressed, the effects of Eisenhower's "enough" extended beyond the confines of SAF into every echelon of the Allied campaign. The measured advance in Normandy allowed forces to consolidate supply lines and prepare for sustained operations, minimizing unnecessary casualties. Montgomery, despite his initial frustration, focused on refining his sector's offensive capabilities, coordinating artillery, armor, and infantry with greater precision. The deliberate pace ensured that every thrust was supported, and every engagement had the backing of logistics, intelligence, and air support. The Germans, for their part, confronted a disciplined opponent. While they sought to exploit weaknesses in the Allied lines, the Allies' cohesion limited the effectiveness of counterattacks. Troop movements were synchronized, reinforcements were efficiently deployed, and gaps in the front were quickly reinforced. The decision to temper Montgomery's aggression indirectly saved lives, maintained unit cohesion, and preserved combat effectiveness during a period when miscalculations could have been catastrophic. Historians later note that Eisenhower's restraint prevented operational overreach that might have resulted in significant losses during the push toward Caen and the subsequent Falaise encirclement. Morale among Allied commanders also benefited from the clear delineation of authority. Officers on both sides understood that audacity must be tempered by responsibility, and that strategic objectives required discipline. Montgomery's compliance, though occasionally reluctant, reinforced the supremacy of coalition coordination over individual ambition. Letters and staff communications reflect a professional respect for the Normandy campaign, and ultimately the European war was subtly but irrevocably shaped. Eisenhower's decision to say, "Enough," was more than a refusal. It was an assertion of the principle that command is not measured by audacity alone, but by the capacity to balance ambition with responsibility, speed with sustainability, and tactical brilliance with strategic vision. Montgomery's reaction, a mixture of frustration and reluctant respect, revealed that even the boldest leaders must sometimes yield to the collective wisdom of command structures. This moment underscores a universal truth about leadership in warfare: human judgment, tempered by ethics and experience, can steer history as decisively as tanks or artillery. Eisenhower preserved the integrity of the Allied advance, protected lives, and maintained the cohesion of a multinational force under immense pressure. It was a lesson in restraint, foresight, and the quiet power of measured decision-making. In the larger tapestry of World War II, such episodes remind us that the war was not only fought in the fields of Normandy or the skies over Europe, but also in rooms like F, where maps, words, and choices determined outcomes that shaped the lives of millions. Leadership, responsibility, and moral courage, embodied in that single, resolute moment, remain as instructive today as they were 70+ years ago. The thunder of battle continued outside, yet within, a calm authority had prevailed, quietly shaping the future of the war and leaving an enduring legacy of strategic wisdom.